My car broke down. I missed my plane. Minutes later, I learned everyone on that plane was dead. The grinding sound my Honda made at 5:43 that morning wasn't normal. I'd owned the car for 6 years and knew every rattle, every squeak, every quirk of its aging engine. This was different. A metallic shrieking followed by 3 sharp clicks, then nothing. Just the dashboard lights glowing weakly while I sat in my garage, turning the key over and over like maybe the fourth or fifth try would somehow work differently. I checked my phone. Flight 427 to Chicago departed at 8:15 from SeaTac. I had exactly 2 hours and 32 minutes to get to the airport, through security, and to my gate. Normally plenty of time, but my car was dead, and I lived 45 minutes from the airport in good traffic. I called an Uber. Estimated wait time, 18 minutes. Then I called my neighbor, Ryan, thinking maybe he could jumpstart my battery. No answer. Called AAA. 40-minute wait for roadside assistance. I did the math in my head and felt my chest tighten. I wasn't going to make it. I grabbed my laptop bag and rolling suitcase and dragged them to the curb to wait for the Uber. But when it finally arrived at 6:07, I-5 was already backed up from an overturned semi near Tacoma. The driver, a quiet man named Ravi, apologized 3 times, even though it wasn't his fault. We sat in traffic, barely moving while I watched the clock on my phone tick forward, 6:24, 6:39, 6:52. By the time we got to the airport, it was 7:48. I had 27 minutes to get through security, and to a gate that was probably a 15-minute walk from the checkpoint. I ran anyway, pulling my suitcase behind me, my laptop bag bouncing against my hip. Made it to the TSA line at 7:54. There were maybe 30 people ahead of me. I asked if I could cut through because my flight was boarding. The agent said everyone's flight was boarding. I stood there, sweating in my business casual clothes while the line crawled forward. At 8:11, I was still 4 people away from the metal detector. I pulled up the airline app on my phone and watched the gate status change from boarding to departed at exactly 8:15. I'd missed it. Missed the flight to the biggest client presentation of my career. I'd been working as a senior structural engineer at Kendall and Pierce for 8 years when this project landed on my desk. Midwest Regional Airport needed a complete overhaul of their Terminal C infrastructure, a $200 million contract. My boss, Catherine Doyle, 26 years in aviation engineering, picked me to lead the team. It was the kind of project that could make a career, the kind that got you promoted to partner. I'd spent 4 months preparing the presentation, coordinating with contractors, running stress tests, and load simulations. The Airport Authority Board was meeting today at 2 p.m. I was supposed to be there with printed proposals, 3D renderings, the whole pitch. Now I was standing in an airport security line watching my flight take off without me. I texted Catherine. Car trouble, missed the flight. Can we reschedule? She responded immediately. Reschedule a board meeting with 12 people. Are you serious? Try to get on the next flight. I checked the airline app. Next direct flight to Chicago was at 11:45 a.m. I could make the presentation if I took that one. Barely. I rebooked, paid the $200 change fee, and went to find coffee. Sat at a table near my new gate and tried to calm down. Tried to convince myself this wasn't a disaster, just a setback. Everything would be fine. My phone rang at 9:52. Caller ID showed Melissa Harper, one of my junior engineers who was supposed to meet me in Chicago. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Melissa, slow down. What happened? I said, my voice steady, even though my hands started shaking. The plane. It's gone, she choked out between sobs. Everyone on board is dead? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, she whispered. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and hit the floor, splashing hot liquid across my shoes. People at nearby tables turned to look. I stood up fast enough that my chair scraped loudly. What are you talking about? What plane? But I already knew. Your flight, the one you were supposed to be on. It went down about 30 minutes after takeoff. They're saying there are no survivors. She kept talking, but I couldn't hear her anymore over the ringing in my ears. I looked up at the departure board. Flight 427 to Chicago should have landed by now. Instead, the status just said, "See agent." Airport security was moving through the terminal in groups. A woman's voice came over the PA system asking everyone to remain calm and stay in the terminal. I hung up on Melissa and immediately called Catherine. She answered on the first ring. Have you heard? Her voice was hollow. I just found out Melissa called me. David was on that plane, Catherine said. David Renner, our lead aviation consultant, the guy who'd been working on this project longer than anyone, who'd flown out yesterday to prepare for today's presentation. Oh my God. So was Jennifer and Troy. The whole advanced team. 3 of our engineers, people I'd worked with for years, people I'd had lunch with last week, people who took the flight I was supposed to be on because my car wouldn't start. I need to go, Catherine said. The office is chaos. FAA is already calling. I'll call you back. She hung up. I sat back down in a chair that wasn't mine and stared at nothing. The terminal around me was moving, but I felt frozen. Security was directing people away from certain gates. Families were crying. Some people were on their phones frantically calling loved ones. A man near me was arguing with an airline representative about getting a refund. Everything felt surreal and distant. My phone buzzed with news alerts. Commercial aircraft crashes shortly after takeoff from Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. All 147 passengers and 6 crew members feared dead. Preliminary reports suggest catastrophic mechanical failure. I opened my email. 13 new messages. Most from colleagues asking if I was okay, if I'd been on the flight. One from our HR director with the subject line, tragic company statement. I couldn't read it. Couldn't process what was happening. 4 people from my company were dead because they took the flight I was supposed to be on. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, trying to breathe normally. Failed. Ended up sitting on the closed toilet lid with my head between my knees, while my chest heaved and my eyes burned. Someone knocked on the stall door asking if I was all right. I said yes, even though I wasn't. When I finally came out and washed my face with cold water, I looked pale and shaky in the mirror. My phone said it was 10:34. I'd been in the bathroom for almost 40 minutes. The airport was being evacuated. TSA was directing everyone back through security to the main terminal. I grabbed my bags and followed the crowd, moving on autopilot. Outside, news vans were already setting up. Reporters were interviewing passengers who'd been on other flights. I kept my head down and walked to the rideshare pickup area, requested an Uber home, and sat in the back seat while the driver tried to make conversation about the crash. I gave one-word answers until he stopped talking. Got home at 11:52. My Honda was still in the garage, still dead, still making that horrible grinding sound when I tried the key one more time just to see. I went inside and turned on the news. Every channel was covering the crash. Flight 427, Boeing 737, departed SeaTac at 8:15, lost contact with air traffic control at 8:48. Witnesses reported seeing the plane nosedive into a forested area approximately 40 miles southeast of Seattle. Recovery teams were on site. The footage showed wreckage scattered across trees, smoke, emergency vehicles. I turned it off. Couldn't watch anymore. Catherine called at 1:17 p.m. She'd been in meetings with company lawyers and FAA representatives all morning. The airport project was suspended indefinitely out of respect for the victims. The client had already sent condolences and postponed all meetings. She asked how I was doing. I said I didn't know. She said the company was arranging grief counselors for anyone who needed them. I thanked her and hung up, sat on my couch, staring at the wall until it got dark outside. The memorial service was 4 days later. Kendall and Pierce rented a hotel conference room that could hold 300 people. David's wife spoke about their 22 years of marriage. Jennifer's parents flew in from Florida. Troy's boyfriend read a poem that made everyone cry. I sat in the back row feeling like an imposter. These people had lost someone. I'd just gotten lucky. Afterward, people kept coming up to me saying how grateful they were that I was okay. How horrible it must feel knowing I almost died. Each conversation made my skin crawl. I didn't almost die. I missed a flight because of car trouble. That's not the same as surviving a plane crash. I left early, went home, and drank half a bottle of wine while reading news coverage of the investigation. The NTSB had recovered both black boxes. Preliminary analysis suggested a catastrophic failure in the hydraulic system. 3 more journalists contacted me over the next week. I blocked them all. I didn't want to be part of the story. Didn't want my face on the news talking about missing the flight. It felt exploitative and wrong. I went back to work 2 weeks after the crash. The office felt empty even though it wasn't. David's desk had been cleared. Jennifer's coffee mug was still in the break room. Troy's engineering certifications were still hanging on his cubicle wall. Catherine assigned me to a smaller project, bridge inspection contract in Oregon. Nothing high stakes, nothing that required travel. I threw myself into the work because it was easier than thinking about anything else. Came in early, stayed late, worked weekends. Amir, a coworker, asked if I was doing okay. I said I was fine. He didn't look convinced. The NTSB released their preliminary findings 6 weeks after the crash. Hydraulic system failure caused by metal fatigue in a critical component. The component had been manufactured by Stratford Aerospace Systems and installed during routine maintenance 3 months prior. The airline had followed all proper protocols. This was a parts failure, not pilot error or maintenance negligence. I read the report 3 times, trying to understand how a single component failure could bring down an entire aircraft. The engineering didn't make sense. Hydraulic systems had redundancies, backup systems, fail-safes. One part shouldn't be able to cause catastrophic failure. I called Catherine and asked if I could review the NTSB's full report, not just the public summary. She asked why. I have questions about the hydraulic system, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Diane, you need to let this go. The investigation is ongoing. The NTSB has experts handling it. You focusing on this isn't healthy. But I couldn't let it go. I spent that night reading everything I could find about Stratford Aerospace Systems. They were a major supplier for commercial aircraft, contracts with every major airline, safety record mostly clean, with a few minor recalls over the past decade. Nothing that suggested systemic problems. Then I found an article from 8 months ago, small trade publication. Headline read, Stratford faces internal audit after quality concerns. The article mentioned unnamed sources reporting pressure to meet production quotas, potential shortcuts in testing procedures, concerns raised by engineers that were dismissed by management. The company had conducted an internal audit and declared everything satisfactory. I screenshot the article and kept digging, found a LinkedIn profile for someone who'd worked at Stratford as a quality assurance engineer until 7 months ago. Her name was Laura Connors. Her profile said she now worked at a different aerospace company. I sent her a message asking if she'd be willing to talk about her time at Stratford. She responded the next morning, not through LinkedIn. She gave me a personal email address. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Bellevue. She looked younger than I expected, maybe 30, with tired eyes and nervous hands that kept fidgeting with her coffee cup. I explained who I was and why I wanted to talk. She listened without interrupting, then asked, Did you lose someone on flight 427? I shook my head. So you're asking these questions because you feel guilty you survived? I'm asking because the engineering doesn't make sense. That component shouldn't have failed. Laura looked around the coffee shop like she was checking to see if anyone was listening. Then she leaned forward and spoke quietly. You're right, it shouldn't have. I spent 9 months at Stratford trying to fix quality control problems before I quit. The hydraulic components were one of my biggest concerns. She thought about it for a long moment. The fatigue testing. Check the documentation for batch C492. That was the production run that included the component installed on flight 427. The testing logs should show stress cycles and failure thresholds. If the logs match what actually happened during the crash, then maybe it was just a terrible accident. But if they don't match, if the component failed earlier than the testing predicted, then someone falsified those logs. I wrote down the batch number on a napkin. How do I access testing logs? You don't. They're proprietary company records, but the NTSB would have requested them as part of the investigation. So you need to convince the NTSB to compare the testing logs against the actual failure data. They're not going to listen to a random engineer making conspiracy theories about a major aerospace supplier. I spent the next week trying to contact someone at the NTSB. Left voicemails, sent emails, got automated responses saying my message had been received and someone would follow up within 10 business days. Nobody followed up. I tried a different approach, called the FAA, Got transferred between departments 4 times before someone in the aviation safety division finally took my information. They said they'd pass it along to the appropriate team. I didn't hear back. Tried the FBI. The woman I spoke to was polite, but said, unless I had evidence of a crime, there wasn't anything they could do. Suspected quality control issues weren't their jurisdiction. I was sitting at my desk one afternoon, staring at the batch number scrolled on my napkin when Catherine came over. I heard you've been calling federal agencies about the crash investigation. Who told you that? I asked. Does it matter? Diane, you need to stop. You're making the company look bad. We have contracts with airlines. We work with the FAA. You harassing investigators makes Kendall and Pierce look unprofessional. I'm not harassing anyone. I'm asking legitimate questions about component failure. Catherine sat on the edge of my desk and lowered her voice. I know you're struggling with survivor's guilt. I get it. But you're not an aviation investigator. You're a structural engineer. This isn't your area of expertise, and it's not your responsibility. Please, for your own well-being and for the sake of this company, let the professionals handle it. I wanted to argue. Wanted to show her the article about Stratford's quality concerns and tell her about Laura's allegations. But looking at Catherine's face, I knew she wouldn't listen. She'd already decided I was having some kind of emotional breakdown. Okay, I said. I'll stop. She looked relieved. Thank you. Now, how's the Oregon Bridge project coming? I didn't stop. Just got more careful about it. Started researching from home instead of work. Used my personal email instead of my company account. Found a lawyer who specialized in whistleblower cases. Her name was Simone Blackwell, 15 years practicing corporate accountability law. I met her at her office in downtown Seattle and explained everything. The suspicious component failure, Laura Connors' allegations about falsified testing, the batch number, my failed attempts to get authorities to take me seriously. Simone listened carefully and took notes. When I finished, she asked, do you have any physical evidence, documents, recordings, anything beyond hearsay from a former employee who signed an NDA? No, that's why I'm here. I need help getting access to Stratford's testing logs. Simone shook her head. Without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, I can't file a case against them. And you personally don't have standing to request proprietary company documents. You're not a victim's family member. You're not a party to the NTSB investigation. Legally, you're just a concerned citizen with a theory. There's nothing I can do. I didn't say that. You could try contacting the families, she continued. If they requested the testing logs through their attorneys as part of a wrongful death lawsuit, Stratford would have to turn them over during discovery. But that's a long process, and there's no guarantee the families would want your help. She gave me the contact information for the law firm representing several Flight 427 families. I called them the next day, spoke to a paralegal who took my information, and said an attorney would call me back. The attorney called me 3 days later. Her name was Elena Ramirez, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s. I explained everything. Laura Connors, batch C492, my failed attempts to get the NTSB and FAA to respond. She listened quietly, typing on her keyboard as I spoke. When I finished, she said, Diane, you're persistent, I'll give you that, but understand, without evidence in hand, your information is just speculation. If you want to help, you need proof that Stratford knowingly falsified documents or contributed to the crash. I don't have the documents, I admitted, but I know they exist. I just need someone with legal authority to request them. She leaned back in her chair. That's where I come in. Families of the victims can request all relevant testing records during a wrongful death suit. If Stratford refuses, we subpoena. If they tampered with the documents, well, her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Do you think the families would want my help? I asked. Elena paused. Some would, some wouldn't. Flight 427 was high profile. A few of the families have already filed suits. Others settled with the airline privately. But I can connect you with the ones who are actively pursuing the truth. I left her office with a stack of business cards, each representing a family I might contact. My chest felt tight with nervous anticipation. This was real now. I wasn't just chasing leads. I might actually uncover something that could prevent another crash. That evening, I drafted an email to the first family, the Bennetts. Their daughter, Clara, had been on the flight. I introduced myself carefully, explained my background as an engineer, and described what I had learned from Laura Connors. I offered to share everything I knew if they were interested. It took 2 days for a reply. The email was brief. We don't know if this helps, but we're willing to talk. Call us. I set up a call for the following morning. Mr. Bennett answered. His voice was low and weary, every word weighed down by grief. I've been waiting for answers since April, he said. If you have information that could help, I need to hear it. I explained the component failure, Stratford's potential shortcuts, the internal audit article, and Laura's warning about batch C492. Are you sure about this? He asked. You're not making assumptions? I've verified the sources I can. Laura Connors worked at Stratford as a quality engineer. She claims the testing logs were altered. I don't have the logs myself, but I know the batch number and where to look. Mr. Bennett was quiet for a long time. Then he said, all right, we'll bring this to our attorney. If there's truth to it, we'll subpoena Stratford. And if you're willing to help, Diane, we could use someone with your expertise to analyze the logs once we get them. I swallowed hard. Of course, I'll help. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities, dangers, and consequences. If Stratford had knowingly falsified testing logs, they weren't just breaking internal rules, they were endangering lives. I remembered Laura's warning. Falsified logs could be hidden in plain sight, marked as routine audits. Even the NTSB might not detect it without comparing actual stress tests against production data. I started drawing diagrams of the hydraulic system, overlaying potential failure points, and calculating stress tolerances based on publicly available specifications. Every calculation brought me closer to a chilling realization. If Stratford had indeed used substandard materials or skipped stress tests, the crash wasn't just a tragic accident. It was preventable. A week later, the Bennett family attorney contacted me. They had officially requested the testing logs from Stratford. The company had initially refused, citing proprietary information. The attorney filed a subpoena. Now, everything was moving into motion. But Stratford wasn't a small company. A subpoena would trigger legal teams, PR spin, and likely threats. I had no idea what I was stepping into, yet a part of me felt alive for the first time since the crash. Because now I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting for the truth, for the E. 2 weeks later, the subpoenaed testing logs arrived at the law firm representing the Bennett family. Thick binders labeled Batch C492 hydraulic stress tests were handed to me. I carried them carefully into my apartment, laying them across the dining table. Each sheet contained rows of numbers, stress cycles, failure thresholds, and calibration notes. At first glance, it looked ordinary, technical, meticulous, and overwhelmingly dense. But I knew better. I pulled up my laptop, opened spreadsheets, and began cross-referencing the data with public specifications for the hydraulic components used in Flight 427. My heart sank as patterns began to emerge. Components that should have failed at 10,000 flight hours were showing critical failures at 4,200 to 4,500 hours. I highlighted every instance in red, drawing arrows to notes marked passed or certified safe. It didn't add up. The failures were not only consistent with Laura's warning, they matched the timeline of Flight 427's crash almost exactly. I kept working through the night, meticulously documenting every anomaly, spreadsheet after spreadsheet, failure after failure. The numbers screamed a single truth. The hydraulic components had been certified despite failing stress tests at less than half their rated lifespan. My hands shook. This wasn't just negligence. This was deliberate falsification. Someone at Stratford had knowingly approved defective components for installation on commercial aircraft. I called Elena Ramirez the next morning. "I've verified it," I said, voice trembling. "The logs show that the components failed at 4,200 hours. They were certified for 10,000. Flight 427's crash aligns with these failures." Elena's voice was steady but urgent. "Diane, we need a written technical report. Document everything. Show the discrepancies. Explain why the certifications were invalid. This will be critical evidence in court. Stratford's legal team will attack every detail of your credibility." I spent the next 3 days compiling a report including Batch C492's original stress test results, actual failure hours versus rated specifications, annotated charts showing patterns of falsification, correlations with Flight 427's catastrophic hydraulic failure. Every page was precise, every number verified. I even included a section on potential consequences if defective components remained in service. By the time I finished, my apartment looked like a miniature forensic lab, papers strewn across every surface, diagrams taped to the walls, and a single red highlighter marking damning evidence. Elena reviewed the report and nodded. "This is airtight. You've done exactly what we need. Now, the family's attorneys will present this to the court. Stratford will try to deny everything, but they can't argue with numbers." A mix of relief and dread washed over me. Relief that the truth was documented, dread at the storm I was about to face. That afternoon, I received a call from the Bennett family. Mr. Bennett's voice was quiet but resolute. "Diane, we've reviewed your report. It's incredible. We'll submit it immediately to the court. You're doing this for all of us." I swallowed hard. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen again." He paused. "It won't. Because of you, it won't." For the first time in months, I allowed myself a breath of hope. The technical work, the sleepless nights, the guilt over missing Flight 427, all of it had led to this moment. Somewhere, deep inside, I realized this was no longer about surviving by chance. It was about making a difference, about turning tragedy into action. 2 days after submitting my technical report, Stratford's legal team made their move. I received a formal notice demanding a meeting at their Seattle office. I arrived at the sleek glass building, heart hammering. The reception area was quiet, sterile. A sharply dressed paralegal escorted me into a conference room. Inside, 5 attorneys from Stratford sat around a polished mahogany table. Their expressions were calm, but the tension was palpable. "Miss Foster," one of them began, voice smooth but cold, "we've reviewed your report. We have some questions regarding your methodology and your qualifications." I remained seated, laptop and report in front of me. "Go ahead." The first line of attack was immediate. "You're a structural engineer specializing in bridges, not aerospace. How can you claim expertise in aviation hydraulics?" "I have 8 years of structural engineering experience," I said evenly. "I'm trained in material science, stress analysis, fatigue testing, and failure prediction. The hydraulic components' stress logs are within my area of expertise. My analysis is based on the data, not assumptions." They exchanged glances. One attorney leaned forward. "We also note that you were emotionally impacted by missing Flight 427. Couldn't that have biased your interpretation of the data?" I clenched my hands. "My analysis strictly compares test data to rated specifications and actual failure hours. The numbers speak for themselves. My emotional state has no bearing on mathematical facts." For the next hour, they grilled me relentlessly. They questioned every annotation, every cross-reference, every assumption. But I stayed calm, answering with precision. Charts, spreadsheets, and highlighted data left them little room to dispute. Afterward, they left the room for deliberation. I sat alone, my pulse slowing but adrenaline still coursing. This was only the first wave. Stratford's team was skilled and ruthless. They would try to discredit me at every turn. The following week, the family's attorneys prepared for the civil deposition. I spent hours rehearsing explanations, anticipating Stratford's attacks, and refining my presentation. Every number had to be airtight. Every correlation had to be bulletproof. On the day of the deposition, I arrived early. Cameras, court reporters, and stacks of documents filled the conference room. Mr. Bennett and the other families were there, their faces taut with grief and determination. The deposition lasted 6 grueling hours. Stratford's attorneys tried everything, questioning my credentials, my motives, even my personal life. But each time, I returned to the evidence: Batch C492, stress logs, Flight 427's failure data. Every claim they made was neutralized by documented numbers. By the end, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but there was a sense of resolve. I knew the truth was on my side. 2 days later, the media caught wind of the deposition. Headlines appeared. Whistleblower engineer exposes potential aviation component fraud. Flight 427 families present damning evidence against Stratford Aerospace. The story spread like wildfire. Public pressure intensified. FAA inspectors expedited checks on all remaining aircraft with batch C492 components. Congress demanded hearings. Stratford's stock plummeted. Late that night, I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by binders and notes, and let myself exhale. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. I had turned my survival and my guilt into action. The grinding sound of my old car that morning still haunted me, but now it symbolized something more. A twist of fate that led to truth, accountability, and justice. The weeks that followed felt surreal. I was no longer just an engineer. I was a key witness in what could become the biggest corporate accountability case in aviation history. Stratford Aerospace didn't take the ProPublica story lightly. Within days, their legal team sent multiple cease and desist letters threatening lawsuits for defamation and breach of confidentiality. My phone rang constantly with calls from their attorneys, investigators, and private security trying to intimidate me. I ignored most of it. My lawyer, Simone Blackwell, told me to document everything, save every email, record every call, and never respond directly without her present. It was exhausting, and for the first time, I realized how much courage it took to stand against a company with deep pockets and immense influence. Meanwhile, Thomas Greer's reporting kept the story alive. Every day, new leaks, more internal emails, corroborating testimonies from former Stratford employees appeared online. Public outrage was mounting. Families of Flight 427 survivors demanded accountability, regulators pushed for faster inspections, and Congress scheduled hearings. One evening, while reviewing another batch of leaked emails from Thomas's source, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Be careful. They're watching you." My stomach tightened. I replied cautiously, "Who is this?" No response. I informed Simone immediately. She arranged for temporary security measures, home surveillance, personal safety checks, and instructions to avoid meeting strangers. Stratford was playing dirty, but I refused to let fear control me. The FAA, under pressure from Congress and the media, finally requested a formal technical analysis from me to be included in their ongoing investigation. For the first time, my expertise was officially recognized. I spent days analyzing failure timelines, comparing stress test logs, and compiling reports that clearly connected batch C492 components to multiple failures and near misses. Then came the first public hearing. Congress convened a session on corporate negligence in aerospace, and I was called as a technical witness. The room was packed. Legislators, reporters, Stratford executives, and the families of Flight 427. Cameras flashed as I walked to the stand, clutching my notes. "Miss Foster," the committee chair began, "can you summarize the findings of your analysis for the record?" I took a deep breath. Yes. My analysis compares the testing logs for batch C492 hydraulic components against the actual failure data from Flight 427 and 3 other incidents. The data indicates that these components failed at significantly lower stress thresholds than their certified specifications. The internal emails from Stratford confirm management knew about these anomalies, but certified the components anyway. A murmur ran through the room. I pressed on. In engineering terms, this is not an accident. These failures were predictable. Installing these components knowingly placed hundreds of passengers at risk. This is criminal negligence. Stratford's representatives protested, claiming my analysis was biased, but I had anticipated this. I presented charts, stress diagrams, and correlations that left little room for doubt. Even the chair nodded at the precision of my work. After the hearing, reporters swarmed me. Questions, flashes, microphones. My world was suddenly public. I answered carefully, reiterating the facts and avoiding speculation. The families came forward, thanking me. Some hugged me. I could see their grief, their pain, and I knew I had to keep going for them. Back home that night, I stared at the ceiling, exhausted. The grinding, clicking sound of my old Toyota still echoed in my mind. A small, random event, my car failing, had kept me alive. And that twist of fate had given me a chance to prevent future tragedies. I poured a glass of water, checking my phone for messages. Thomas had emailed a new batch of leaked emails. Another engineer from Stratford had come forward anonymously. The investigation was snowballing. Justice, it seemed, was within reach. The retaliation from Stratford Aerospace began quietly but escalated quickly. My emails were monitored, phone calls traced, and my home received a series of suspicious deliveries. Some benign, like catalogs, others more concerning, like unmarked packages containing components that looked identical to the failed hydraulic parts. Simone Blackwell insisted I keep records of everything. "They're trying to intimidate you. Don't let them. Every attempt is evidence." Work had long been behind me. Prescott and Lane had officially terminated me, and I hadn't looked back. But now my life revolved around analysis, testimony, and coordination with journalists and legal teams. Thomas Greer's ProPublica articles kept hitting new leaks, and the public pressure on Stratford became relentless. One morning, I received a call from Douglas Kaplan, the lead attorney for the Flight 427 families. "Diane, Stratford is attempting a settlement. They're offering $200 million if we drop the criminal investigation." I froze. $200 million was more than I'd ever seen in my life, but the thought of letting them off the hook made my stomach turn. I can't. Not after everything. They need to be held accountable, not just pay to move on. Douglas sighed. I expected as much. But be prepared. Their lawyers will escalate everything now. Threats, smear campaigns, the works. 2 days later, a major news outlet ran a story questioning my credibility. The headline read, "Engineer who missed Flight 427 claims corporate negligence." The article framed me as emotionally unstable, using my missed flight as a hook to discredit my analysis. I felt the familiar pulse of fear, but Simone calmed me. "Ignore them. You have documentation, emails, technical reports. Truth is on your side. Let the defense try to smear you. They'll fail under scrutiny." The criminal trial began 8 months after the ProPublica expose. I was called to testify first. Stratford's lawyers immediately tried to undermine me. Miss Foster, one asked, you are a structural engineer, correct? Not an aviation engineer? Yes, I replied calmly, but the principles of materials engineering, fatigue testing, and hydraulic systems are universally applicable. I've applied these principles to verify the failure data of the components in question. Your analysis relies on leaked documents from a former employee. How do we know they're legitimate? I presented the chain of custody, Thomas Greer's verification, and my detailed technical comparison of the batch C492 testing logs with the NTSB findings. The charts, stress diagrams, and calculations left the courtroom silent. Michael Brennan, the former Stratford Quality Assurance Manager, testified for 3 days. He explained in detail how management ignored his repeated warnings, reassigned him, and certified defective components to meet production quotas. The evidence was damning. Stratford's defense argued it was an unfortunate accident, not criminal negligence. But when I took the stand, showing the clear correlation between predicted component failures and the actual Flight 427 disaster, the argument collapsed. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When the verdict came, the 3 executives, including the VP of production, were found guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and involuntary manslaughter. The VP received 15 years, the other 2 got 10 and 8. Stratford's stock was delisted, and the company filed for bankruptcy 3 months later. The families of Flight 427 had justice. The FAA grounded every aircraft with batch C492 components, redesigned safety protocols, and strengthened oversight on aerospace suppliers. I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The battle was over, but the emotional weight lingered. I had survived a near-death event, lost colleagues, faced corporate threats, and helped hold a dangerous company accountable. The grinding, clicking sound of my old Toyota in the early morning seemed like a distant memory, but it had been the catalyst that changed everything. 2 months after the criminal convictions, the civil wrongful death trial for Flight 427 began. I was called as an expert witness. My task? To explain the technical analysis of Stratford's defective components in terms the jury could understand. The courtroom was tense. Families of the victims filled the gallery, clutching each other for comfort. I felt a knot in my stomach, but also a determination I hadn't realized I possessed. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about the 152 lives lost and holding Stratford accountable. Rachel Flynn, Douglas Kaplan's associate, spent hours coaching me. Explain the fatigue testing in simple terms. And show how the numbers don't lie. Stay calm. The defense will try to rattle you with your lack of aviation credentials and the missed flight. Don't engage the bait. When I took the stand, Stratford's lawyers immediately began their strategy. Miss Foster, one started. You missed Flight 427. Your colleagues died. How can we be sure your analysis isn't clouded by guilt or emotion? I paused, then spoke clearly. I missed a flight because of car trouble. That is irrelevant to the engineering analysis I conducted. The failure of batch C492 hydraulic components is documented in both Stratford's internal testing logs and the NTSB reports. The data is factual, objective, and verifiable. They tried every tactic, questioning my emotional state, highlighting my lack of direct aviation experience, and suggesting bias. I stayed calm, walking them through the stress tests, showing diagrams of failure points and explaining how the components failed at 40% below their rated specifications. I highlighted the emails from Stratford executives instructing staff to make the numbers work and dismissing valid safety concerns. Michael Brennan testified again, providing firsthand accounts of corporate pressure and attempts to cover up the defects. Former employees corroborated his story. The combination of internal documents, expert testimony, and my technical analysis created an airtight case. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the 4-person read the verdict. Stratford Aerospace was found liable for wrongful death, fraud, and gross negligence. The families were awarded $1.3 billion in damages. I left the courtroom feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. These families had lost loved ones, and no sum of money could bring them back. But justice had been served, and measures were in place to prevent similar tragedies. The media covered the trial extensively. For once, my name appeared not as a footnote, but as a credible expert who had helped uncover a corporate cover-up. Thomas Greer won a Pulitzer for the investigative series, and he thanked me during his speech. Lisa Kowalski, now working with the FAA, sent an email expressing relief that the truth had come out. I visited David Renfro's grave on the 1-year anniversary of the crash. His wife placed flowers, and we spoke briefly. She thanked me for helping ensure Stratford was held accountable. I cried in my car afterward, not from guilt this time, but from a long, complex mix of grief, relief, and catharsis. The months after the trial were quieter. I accepted a position at a small forensic engineering firm specializing in structural failures. The work was challenging and fulfilling, analyzing why bridges collapsed, buildings failed, and systems malfunctioned. My role had expanded, and my skills were finally being used to uncover truth and prevent disasters. My old Toyota finally died 6 months after the crash. The mechanic confirmed the starter motor had completely seized. I scrapped it and bought a Subaru with top safety ratings. Every time I drove it, I thought about that morning, the grinding sound, the clicks, the car that failed and saved my life. Sometimes I wondered if it was luck, fate, or just random chance. I still carried the weight of the Flight 427 survivor's guilt, but I had channeled it into something meaningful. I had turned tragedy into accountability, fear into action. That was all I could do. Life moved on, but the memory of that morning never left me. The grinding sound of my Toyota, the 3 clicks, the dead battery, all of it replayed in my mind whenever I thought about Flight 427. If my car had started normally, I wouldn't be here. David, Jennifer, Troy, and the others would still be gone, and Stratford's crimes might have remained hidden. I continued my work at the forensic engineering firm. Every collapsed bridge, failed structure, or malfunctioning system I investigated reminded me of the stakes, people's lives. The work was fulfilling, but it was also a constant reminder of what had been lost and what could have been prevented. Thomas Greer's Pulitzer brought national attention to Stratford's cover-up. The story prompted new FAA regulations and stricter oversight of aerospace suppliers. Lisa Kowalski became a leading voice in aerospace quality control. The changes saved lives, though they could never undo what had happened on Flight 427. Occasionally, reporters would reach out, wanting to revisit the story of the woman who missed the flight and uncovered the truth. I politely declined most requests, feeling that my life was no longer about headlines. I had done what mattered. The evidence, the investigation, and the exposure of Stratford's negligence had real-world consequences. That was enough. I still thought about that morning often. The randomness of survival, the fragility of life, the strange way a small mechanical failure, a starter motor seizing in an old Toyota, had changed the course of events for hundreds of people. Luck? Fate? Chance? Probably a combination. But I knew one thing for certain. I had been given a second chance, and I'd made it count. On the one-year anniversary of Flight 427, I visited David Renfro's grave again. His wife and I stood together quietly placing flowers. "He would have been proud," she said. I nodded, tears in my eyes. I cried, not for myself but for them, for the lives lost, for the justice finally served. The grief never fully left me. Survivor's guilt lingered in small ways. A thought, a flash of memory, a dream. But it had transformed into action, into accountability, into change. I couldn't save those 152 people, but I could ensure their deaths led to reform, to vigilance, to safety that might prevent future tragedies. I still remember the sound of my Toyota that morning, the metallic shriek, the clicks, a simple mechanical failure that saved my life and gave me a purpose I hadn't anticipated. I survived, and I made it count. That was all anyone could do.